Representative Steve Scalise has returned back to Capitol Hill, and he is luckily recovering from the shooting that did threaten his life. He has opened up about some of the injuries that he sustained as a result of a shooter who showed up during a baseball practice and opened fire. Now the shooter has died. Someone opened fire against him on the scene, and he was killed immediately. Now, Steve Scalise, obviously, as you can see in that video, is still suffering from the injuries, but luckily he is not only surviving, he seems to be thriving based on the way he has spoken to the press about these incidents. So let's take a look at the first video where he talks about God and his role in saving him.
When I was laying out on that ball field, the first thing I did once I was down and I couldn't move anymore is I just started to pray. And I will tell you, it gave me an unbelievable sense of calm, knowing that at that point it was in God's hands. But I prayed for very specific things. And I'll tell you, pretty much every one of those prayers was answered. And they were some pretty challenging prayers I was putting in God's hands. But he really did deliver for me and my family. And it just gives you that renewed faith in understanding that the power of prayer is something that you just cannot underestimate. So I'm definitely a living example that miracles really do happen. The first place I want to go to thank true angels along the way starts with the United States Capitol Police.
Okay, so you guys take it away.
It's a I guess inspiring story that he made it back, because I mean in the first few days after, people didn't know what was gonna happen.
Right.
He was shot in the abdomen, waist area.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of organs, right? So all that had to be, as we'll see soon, pieced back together. It's just the one thing you always hope there's something. Again, I went to when we first started this story with Tom Price and his apology for his expenses. I just wish people would learn something from it. There doesn't have to be this viciousness of, oh man, yeah, he's hurting, all this stuff that I'm sure some people directed towards Scalise's way. I just wish he would understand that he's not the first person that's been shot. Yeah. And when he was lying on that ball field and he almost died and he was praying to God, there's people who were lying on the ground and were praying to God that they survived too, and it didn't work out for them. And they didn't have Capitol Hill police next to them to defend them and take out a madman shooter.
And the best healthcare in the country.
Yeah. They didn't have government healthcare.
Right. And then so suddenly this is an important thing because of who he is. Your family would have missed you. There's a lot of family members that missed their deceased because of something that happened that didn't have to happen. And not that it would be 100% done, but there's something you do when you're in a position of power to not make it easier for people to be killed by random and violent gunfire in a country that's divided to the degree that we are now. And this guy targeted specifically Republican congressmen because they were at their practice, so he knew who they were and where they would be. So it was based off of partisanship and a divide and the anger for certain people in the government. So there's certain people that get targeted in our society, and they're just as important as you are. Trust me, they have the same organs you got, and they deserve theirs deserve to still stay together just the way yours did. I wish they would understand that.
I'm gonna take it a little bit further, and I'm glad that you brought this human aspect to the story, because with great power comes great responsibility. If we go through this fight over Medicare for all, or if we, God forbid, go through another like repeal and replace Obamacare again, I urge those who have been affected by gun violence and who have lost members of their families or who have not been able to pay for their health care because of shootings, I urge you to go to Representative Scalise's office and make that case in a very vocal way, and in using technology and making sure that that message gets out there, because he does have a responsibility, and it is an absolute horror what happened to him, and that I hope that never happens to anybody else in office again. Yeah. But you are still an elected official, and now you have a personal story, and it's not just about the police who were there with weapons, because I know where that message turns. Right. That good thing that there was a good guy there with weapons. Right. This is about two things: guns, and people who should not be holding guns and purchasing guns, and healthcare.
Yeah, so I agree to some extent on everything that you guys have said. Obviously there's the gun debate, and that is probably the most difficult thing to move Americans on, because we are incredibly divided when it comes to that issue. And I've been clear about the fact that I am not a proponent of banning guns. I think that responsible Americans should have access to guns. I do think that there's an issue with a lobbying group like the NRA getting its funding from weapons manufacturers who want to turn a profit. They want to profit as much as possible, so they want to put as many guns in the hands of as many people as possible. Now, that's one issue, and I think Scalise should absolutely, at least have some empathy for the other side of the gun debate. But he should also have empathy in regard to individuals who don't have health care, who wouldn't have the same type of quality treatment that he received and that allowed him to survive. And so that's the issue that comes up over and over again. The word that I bring up when it comes to a wide variety of stories that we cover, just this lack of empathy. And you see it among politicians, you see it among Americans, and you would think and you would hope that if someone goes through something as incredibly tragic as what Scalise has gone through, they would learn from it. He would learn from it and realize, oh my God, had I not had this government health care. Again, it's government taxpayer funded healthcare that these elected officials get to take advantage of. Had he not had that, who knows what would have ended up happening, right? And then the final thing is, rhetoric, because I think rhetoric does matter. We are divided, and the type of rhetoric that we're seeing among elected officials right now is unprecedented. And the fish rots from the head down. We have Donald Trump saying all sorts of incredibly disrespectful things during his campaign. Yeah, during his campaign, promoted violence, talking about punching people in the face. Reporters, right. And so, and by the way, violent rhetoric on both sides, it needs to stop. 100%, okay? Don't incite people to violence. Don't, needlessly overly demonize people to the point where someone who might be mentally unstable might take action against someone that you're talking about. Like, we need to really take a step back, cool our tempers for a second and think about how we can engage in political discourse in a civil way. And I think that's another thing that we can learn from this. So I'm glad he's making a recovery. We'll see if, it's been a learning experience for him.
If you like this video, you probably like independent media. The best way to support independent media, become a member of the Young Turks. TYTnetwork.com/join.